Our industry is transforming. We are related with culture and also with innovation and technology. Well, we'll hear a lot about esports, virtual reality, augmented reality. So this is the evolution we're going through. But also in the Western world, we are facing a new challenge, which is excess, wrong use of some things, and we believe that the excess and the abuse of any activity is bad. And we can see that the excess of sport, the excess of eating, wrong diet, or binge drinking is not good for health. And we believe the same goes for gaming. Gaming is a very good leisure option, which is the first leisure option of Spanish people, but it has to be done in the right way. Our industry is a responsible industry. We have been using the PEGI codes for years, which inform of what ages are recommended for each game. We also have parental control measures to prevent the access of little children, so that parents have the option to decide what kind of games can be used by their children and whether they can buy things on the games. And in AEVI we have gone a step beyond, because we see that some of these things, like the PEGI codes and the parental control measures, are not widely known. So we have created a program called the Good Gamer with two goals. One is explaining parents and also the educational community how games should be used in a responsible way. And we provide some recommendations so that there are no problems. And we also want to show the positive aspects of gaming, because I said gaming is a reality and is the first leisure option. This is the present day. But in the future there will be another potential in other fields, like in education, in health, in culture. And we want to enhance these projects with this program, Good Gamer. Also, the public administrations are increasingly following our industry. They support us, and they have realized that they should support us as our neighboring countries are doing. France, Italy, Canada, or the United States, where the administration is supporting gaming due to its link with innovation and technology and to culture, and we have to thank the Spanish administration for doing so. Well, as for innovation and the role that's being played by gaming in the health industry, we can see that there's an increasing number of hospitals and clinics where they have an area related with technology and health, and we can see that it can be used for locomotive recovery, and it helps with palsy, with treatments with Alzheimer and memory issues, and also to improve the quality of life of people with cancer after chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatments. So it's being used in many treatments, in TADH, etc. And we will see some examples, some study cases of this use in the health field. Also in education, in schools and universities, video games are being used as they are a very good tool to disseminate knowledge. So it's been increasingly used in these fields, and I don't want to take longer. I just want to thank the presenters and all the audience for being here with us today. I think it's going to be very interesting. I hope this is the first edition of many editions, and I welcome you all. And we hope to see you in the various activities that we will organize this week, especially at IFEMA starting Thursday. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolina Avellana, and I'll be introducing the presenters. I'd like to thank you for being in this first edition of Madrid Games Week, organized by the City Hall of Madrid, the Community of Madrid, the IVY, and IFEMA. As you all know, from this Thursday until Sunday at IFEMA, in the halls of IFEMA, we will have a very large gaming trade fair. Because of this, in this conference, we have brought some presenters to share with us some knowledge on this world of gaming, and also about the positive impact of gaming as a development tools in some fields that we would not think of, like culture, health, and education. Just to give you a first stroke of what we're going to be seeing here today and tomorrow, we will see how gaming has been incorporated in some classrooms as an educational tool, as usual as digital blackboards. As Jose Maria Moreno has said, we will also speak of health, of the health industry, as video games help in the recovery of patients with psychomotricity issues, and also in some diseases, some psychic diseases such as depression or anxiety. And for those of you who are here and are thinking, I'm a very good gamer, I'd like to have a career in this industry, where can I get some studies, where can I get some professional opportunities, how can I enter the industry? Well, we'll answer also these questions. And before I introduce the first presenter, let me remind you that you can follow this event on streaming on the site of Fundación Telefónica, and also in the hashtag Congreso MGW. Then I'll give the floor to Gregorio Luri. He's a philosopher and writer that will give us some cultural context of gaming, and also this need that we all have to play in the virtual world, but also in the real world. And Gregorio, I've heard that you have been a great fan of a philosophy game where the main character is Professor Gustavo Bueno. I just leave it there. I give you Gregorio Luri.
Bueno, buenos días.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. Borja, congratulations. And I'm very pleased that you have invited an outsider to this world to speak of an issue that I think it's interesting, not because it's video gaming, but because video games represent something that's more relevant. Last May, I was invited to take part in a conference of cultural journalists in Santander. It was about gaming. I warned them that I was very interested in the philosophical reflection upon games, but also that I had no idea about gaming. I didn't know if I should accept the invitation or not. But then I found a piece of news about some fishers in Norway that had found a white whale with a harness. It's a real story. I thought of Moby Dick. Someone somewhere was riding white whales, and this triggered my imagination. Riding a tamed whale is turning video games into games. I thought that was a common feature of our time. Then I got to the conclusion that any thinker that thinks of video games will discover many reasons that call for a serious theory, for a critical contemplation. There's nothing in video games that's foreign to the human things. After the discovery of a white whale with a harness, I spoke of Ian Boost in Santander, that in a video game we are not looking for anything that's very different to what the children of a century ago were looking for when they would climb on a tree and they would imagine great adventures. The different moods of the game, of any genuine player: expectation, absorption, and usually addiction, because addiction is one of the possibilities of anything that we do with passion, also of the fears triggered by video games, and also of the therapeutical hopes for the treatment of some attention diseases. And then I mentioned something that calls my attention because it's against the trends of our times, what we could call talatodulism, this permanent presence of death in video games, now when death socially nowadays plays the role of what used to be played by the obscene, what must be covered. This calls for doctoral thesis. And actually this is what's going on in some countries, in the United States, in England, in Northern Europe. For example, in France, Mathieu Triclot has a very good book on philosophy of video games of 2012, which I think is a very good example on philosophy on video games. Today, my goal is to encourage young philosophers to take video games seriously, because it allows us to pose the same questions we have always posed from different perspectives. In Santander, I was in a debate between those that I call informed and then apocalyptics. Today, I'm speaking, thinking that in the audience we have people that just want to get new knowledge from this conference. I'm just going to tell only 7 questions that I think we must start thinking regarding video games. First, video games are not innocent, but we have to say that there are not innocent human practices, because human beings have more potential than what they think. There is no object at the reach of humans that cannot be made holy or perverse. From a kiss to an axe, we live unused possibilities of ourselves. Video games, as in general technology, is an anthropological process that extends our constitution, like in the old Castilian hostels. In video games, each one finds only what is in his baggage. Also, criticizing video games is not innocent. This is why the Supreme Court of the United States rejected a law passed in California that banned the selling of violent video games to children. The Supreme Court said that video games were protected by the First Amendment on freedoms of speech. But also we should not think that this is a maneuver to develop international neoliberalism. And this criticism has also some history. Some people say that in the 1980s there was a video game called Polybius that should have been invented by the CIA to control people, and that was on the market for a very short time. This is an urban legend followed by many, although no one has ever been able to prove its existence. The first mentions of Polybius were found in internet in 1998. To the theory of the framework, we call game anything that we can put within a framework of activities that we consider leisure activities. We would never understand how important the framework is. A novel is anything that we put in a framework of novels. Art is anything that we put in a framework of art, etc. But there are some frameworks that are designed as to be frameworks. We know that theater play is good because our view has been kept within the limits of the stage. The same goes for filmmaking. The framework is mostly effective when it disappears and we submerge in the action that's within the framework. The framework of the video game is what has to be invisible to make video game possible. A framework is defined by the experience it triggers. Within the framework, objects are not what they are, but what they do. There are frameworks that define passive experiences, like the frame of the TV set, and some that foster active actions, like video games, where we need coordination between brain, hands, so fine-tune coordination, but also coordination between the new expectations developed by the game and the experience we have developed during our relationship with the game. Third, violence. Video games trigger different emotions, but this doesn't mean that they are a plague. We are usually warned that the violence when we play is taken from by the players to the real world, or that the passion that we put into the game multiplies the emotional state of the player, having an effect on his relation with the world. And also we hear that they foster thoughts related with violence that affect our daily lives. I know you have all heard this before. I like to say, and if you have to take just one sentence home, one message, I invite you to take this one. I want to say something real clear. Never throughout human history we have played less violent games than these games. Each of the games I played when I was a child was more violent than a video game. If the children of my generation have always injured knees, it's because we deserved it. We were not using only rolling stones to throw them into the water. There is no lengthwise study that has shown a certain relationship between violence and video games. All that we have are some studies that show an increase in the long term of thoughts that are aggressive and violent. However, if after playing some video games this increase of aggressive feelings is real, is it more than the feelings that we get, the thoughts that we get after watching some films, after watching TV, after reading some books, or after some family situations? Patrick Markin, director of the interpersonal lab of the Villanova University states that humans, and this is just a reference, not the dogma, that men that execute some violent acts, they play with video games that are less violent compared to the general ones. This is a reference from one of his books from 2017. Play is a necessary way of relating to ourselves, also to our wild side. Some think that by eliminating games, we eliminate this wild side, but this is not true. Also, the leisure inquisition. There was a Franco minister, Gabriel Arias Salvado, that said that his main goal as a minister, his main mission of information minister, was saving souls for heaven. This is like nowadays, because the society is in risk of becoming a hell of moral saviors. We thought that morals could not be violated, and also that good citizens are those who dream to do what the evil people do. Then why should we stop these dreams of players? Where's the danger? Why some people fear someone else's dreams? Do we need a moral police to save video game players? Why was a scandal in the framework of video games is accepted as novel culture when it's in a book? In the framework of a book. I'll just give you an example. Nobody will say anything against Heinrich Heine when he writes that I am very peaceful, here are my wishes, a cabin, a good roof, a good bed, good food, milk and butter, some flowers on my windows, and in front of my door some trees, and if God wants, He will give me the opportunity to see 6 or 7 of my enemies hanging from those trees. Before they die, I will forgive them for what they have done to me, because we have to forgive our enemies, but just after they are hanged. Well, this is no scandal, no fuss about this. It is just literature by a great author, and it's good that there is no scandal, because this is a symbolic play, which is the play of art. If law should make us forget nature, just watch what's being banned, because this is where we can see what we don't want to see about human nature. Loris Kuller and Shed Olson say that doing violent acts in a fiction environment is a good way to channel wrath. These are the directors of the mental health department of the psychiatry ward of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Hospital. This is a reference from a book on video games, which is called like the Great Theft to Children, the surprising truth about violent video games and what can parents do. This is a book from 2008. The leisure inquisition has a panic in front of the violence of some video games and also in front of video games, but this is not because of video games. This is from the paranoid education of children. This need to an super safety, which is in the center of the main children's disease, which is the fragilization of children. the evil is not in video games, but in these knees without injuries, these knees of children without injuries. Children that grow without injuring their knees are children that have no experience of adventure, and this should worry us. A boy that moves too much has TADH. Just one question. Who do you think the following text refers to? They have no way to focus. They are absorbed by external stimuli, and they cannot think of themselves, which is a necessary way to learn. Being quiet is very difficult for them, so it's very hard to teach them anything. This seems like a description, the literary description of the difficulties that many teachers have to face in Spanish classroom, as according to some, because of the use of screens. But this is actually from a book on the pygmies of the Congo, written by a missionary in 1932. The lack of attention does not seem to be necessarily linked to new technologies, but nowadays all Mambuti pygmies would have to go to the school psychologist. 6. The world as a video game. In 1997, Hearst wrote in Joystick Nation, video games are the perfect training for life at the end of this century, where daily existence calls for the need to process different types of information at the same time. Players are adapted to a world that's increasingly similar to an arcade experience. And another thing, in 15 years, the video games have become a global industry of $6 billion a year. And in the arcade games, and also in the children's rooms and also offices from Ohio to Osaka, video games have become a central element in the lives of people, and this is a tectonic change in the scenario of in the landscape of entertainment. Life is like an arcade game because we're going faster, but we're always slower than the game. There's no way to win. Our life nowadays is an experience of the daily defeat against time. We seem to be like lost sheep that are running but are always late. But this life has not been created by video games. Video games just reflect this life. According to the Entertainment Software Association, the average age of American gamers is 35 and increasing. That means that they are grandparents. Here, video games was always a phenomenon game, a human phenomenon, not a children phenomenon. And I just want to leaving a statement here. Is the tragic does not start with the game. It's exactly the other way around. The tragic stops where game starts. Even though it might be a sad game for a sad audience, like riding a white whale. Those who believe in moral inquisition should ask themselves why free play has been reduced over the last decades, and now the spaces where the children could live their adventures without the supervision of an adult. So don't blame the video game, because it's just the messenger. Thank you very much.
Hablaba Gregorio de esos prejuicios. Grigory was talking about his prejudices around video games, and I think that with our next guests we will be breaking those prejudices further. He is a teacher, professor in the Public University of Navarre, and he's a pioneer in video games as a tool to study history. His name is Íñigo Mugueta, and he will talk about the connection between video games and learning. The floor is yours, Íñigo. Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks Fundación Telefónica and AEVI for their invitation to the project History and Video Games that I am representing. This is a great honor to be here and to start collaborating with the world of the businesses, because I think it's very important to have this relationship between the academic world and the business world. I think this is the path towards the future that we have already started, and Jose Maria and I have already started working on it from our universities. I will structure my presentation around 8 questions. These are the ones that some journalists ask us. Some of them have already been asked earlier today, and to be honest, we have had quite an impact on the media with our project History and Video Games, and we have received questions from the media, and what I'm here to tell you today is part of what they ask me about and part of what I would like to ask about. Sometimes the replies that we give and sometimes the replies that we should be giving. So this is the starting point for my presentation today, because we are at a point in the research in video games where I think that we have moved a long way forward, and we need to start doing different things. We need to start saying something different from what we've been saying up to now. First thing I'm usually asked is, can you learn by playing video games? Every journalist has asked us about that, and this is something that everyone is concerned about, and it's important that they are so. The answer is yes. I hope that here we are among gamers, and we all know that we have learned a lot from video games. But the question that we should ask ourselves after that is this learning efficient? And this is one of the challenges that we are facing today. The efficiency is measured in terms of time and learning accomplished. And this is the path that we need to pursue. What do we learn and how fast we are learning it? Because if something very small takes us 3 hours to memorize it or to learn it, maybe it's not really worth it. Something that students and people who want to be on my side sometimes in the conversation usually tell me, because they usually think that we need some support, and so they tell me, Íñigo, we learn a lot because with this game I learned the life of William Wallace, for instance. And then I ask them, so is William Wallace in our learning curriculum? How many hours did this take you, when this is not included in the things that you should have learned by the Spanish education system? Maybe it would have been useful to just read a brochure about William Wallace, and it would have been much more useful. I'm not saying that you shouldn't play this game. I've played it a lot, but maybe we should find what is interesting in this video game in particular. But if the thing is learning about William Wallace, I don't find it so interesting. The same thing happens with Call of Duty. People tell me, I've learned about the Roman campaigns, and we would go back to the same point. Maybe in primary school here, they don't need to learn the Roman campaigns. Now, we're talking here about Kurt Squire, who works in the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and we are dealing with the connection between the academic world and the business world. He started saying that once that you take the video game into the classroom, you're going to spend some time in teaching the children to use the video game. You are going to be investing some time in teaching them how to use it. And so this is an aspect that you need to take into account when you bring any video game into the classroom. Another aspect that people should be asking about is, what can video games contribute to education. If I visit Cosmopolitan, they tell me that video games are just excellent. They make you more alert. It can even ease your pain or your anxiety. It sharpens your sight. But when I go to a publisher's website, and they can also give me so many things positive that are positive about video games, and this is really not realistic. Some video games can give us some things, and others will give us different positive aspects. For instance, Candy Crush will not help you develop your teamwork skills. Yesterday, for instance, in a video game week that is held in another region of Spain, showed us how to use Candy Crush for the learning experience. But you need to determine exactly what this game can give you. So I'm not concerned about Cosmopolitan's articles. Sometimes we need some advertising. We just need to see how Donald Trump reacts to them anytime there's a catastrophe in his country. But what I'm more concerned about is these scientific approaches. They tend to generalize. They tend to say video games are useful for this or for this other thing. And I think that we have actually reached the point where in the academic world, at least, because we still need the media to keep advertising video games, but in the academic world, I really think that we need to overcome these generalizations. In the Good Gamer portal, you can see this sentence. One can no more say what the effects of video game are than one can say what the effects of food are. We can talk about the effects of fat or of sugars or a certain ingredient, but we cannot talk about the effects of food in general. What are the educational effects of video games? Well, we need to determine them when we analyze each video game. These people started running such an analysis about the complexity and the social aspects of video games, and there they were differentiating them by categories, but they were calling them shooter games or platform games, etc., to make their divide to analyze them. Now, another question that we're asked is, any video game can teach you things? Well, to be honest, I find it very difficult to work with Fortnite, but despite that, I find news telling me that there's this or that teacher is using Fortnite to teach. But the truth is that they're not working with Fortnite, but they're obtaining the skills or the methodologies used by the developers of the game in order to teach. But honestly, I cannot say that you can land on any island with a parachute and start shooting people to learn anything. Some time ago, we ran an experience where we gave several students different video games about the First or the Second World Wars. They could choose whichever, and most of the groups chose shooting games, but one of them chose this video game called Valiant Hearts. It has a comic book, a graphic novel look and feel, and it shows us the terrible effects of the war, and the response from the children in this group had nothing to do with the responses of the students from the rest of the groups. They were much more interesting. So there are certain video games that can be more apt to work on a certain content than others, so we need to choose which ones are better. Now, how can I tell if such contents are interesting for my students? Well, first of all, you need to play, such as my colleagues here. They got their hands on the game and they started learning to play, and many teachers call me to tell me to join them and play and run an activity with video games, and I ask them, can you play this video game? Do you know how to? And they tell me, nope, I don't. And so I tell them, well, first of all, learn to play the video game, because if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how to play, you won't know how to use it. So let's play, first of all. the leitmotif of our project is to learn to play. There are businesses that are very teaching-oriented when they develop their history games, and sometimes I would say that it's necessary that they could explain the purpose and not only thinking about the expert gamer, but also that they give explanations to the parents who would like to share the video gaming experience with their children, or the teachers who would like to join in their students in playing, so that they felt more inclined to use them. So I miss sometimes these old manuals that we used to have, because I'm already quite old, and I used to enjoy having those manuals instead of the tutorials that sometimes are difficult or do not really facilitate the gaming experience. But I think there's a lot that we can do in order to improve the experience for other types of audiences. I think one of the examples of Barbara is very clear. I don't know if you know his game, Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a very widely known game that has attempted to be very loyal, very faithful to the real history, and has been criticized because of the values it delivers. But I think that if he had been careful enough to explain how he wanted people to use his video game, we might be talking about a different thing. What should I look into to know if a video game is apt for my students? I will not act as a competitor for the IAV. There are certain aspects that are pretty obvious, but we are also launching a small line of work where we're going to analyze something that I'm very interested in. We're not going to analyze video games from the viewpoint of the historic contents that they have in Assassin's Creed, for instance, about the French Revolution or whatever, but how we can generate a historic line of thought with this game. So we would be starting with the page on the right-hand side, and we would be dealing with how they deal with the historic causality and the historic relevance, and we are trying to see how the video game can make you think and reflect about history. I don't want you to know exactly the dates about William Wallace's life, for instance. What we need to do is to teach to think. Can video games achieve this? I think so, but we need to prove it. 2 years ago in Pamplona, we ran a seminar, a summer camp actually, where, as you can see, several children were playing historical games, and we tried to develop these different aspects towards historical thinking. I'm not the first to attempt to do this. There have been attempts in the United States, and we published the results. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast, but I don't think I have too much time. So we published the results in Clio History Teaching, and therefore you can find the results of all this research in this journal. And also, I want to tell you that we have worked on two things: the historical thinking, the way of trying to help students to think, and also a new line that we have started recently. As you can see on the right-hand side, you can see red bonnets, and these are from the city of Irún in Guipúzcoa, in the north of Spain. And this is very controversial because women are not allowed to use it, and it's a celebration for the Battle of 1821 that we will try to recreate through the use of video games and using Total War. We will be signing a project where we will give value to this intangible value, and we will promote it among the different schools, and then we will be using Steam in order for gamers to use this mode. This is a way to highlight the heritage and the legacy and the history. I think this is quite innovative, and I think there are many things that can be done from this starting point. With this, we do not have a business purpose, but we are trying to give new ideas. What problems will I encounter when I try to bring a video game to the classroom? I think there are some aspects that are very important. One of them is the status of the IT classroom in this country. I still see that there are tube monitors still on the schools, and many children do not have a computer for themselves. Something else that we have found is STEAM. When we start a seminar or a workshop, it's quite a mess to handle the account in STEAM. With STEAM, you need to have an email address, and you need 25 email addresses, for instance, for the team. And every time you want to add a new email account, you receive an email from STEAM. So we run several workshops, and we find the workarounds for this. We are sorting this out, but when a teacher wants to do this in a school, he or she will encounter great difficulties in implementing this type of workshops through STEAM. Then I also want to know if my students have actually learned something, because I might have the intuition that they have learned something because I have learned through video games. But how can I tell that my students have to? I might have the impression that they have. But I am in the university. We are researchers, and we need to prove this. And for this, we need evidence. Some researchers from the Murcia University already ran a demo, already proved this. Alejandro Egea proved that video games might help us remember information better. This is very interesting, but this is not useful. To remember is not enough. We want to go beyond that, because I know video games can be more useful than that, but we need to prove that. Video games can help us reflect, think, and develop cognitive skills that are far beyond just remembering, but we need to prove this. In the school campus, history and video games that we ran a couple of years ago, that I've already mentioned earlier, it lasted for a week, and on Wednesday, we had the media with us, as you can see on the picture, and the children were interviewed, and I brought the newspapers the next day to the classroom, and the students were saying, how could they simplify everything we said so much? My classmates are going to say that I'm dumb because of the way that they are presenting this. The children understood very well the complexity of the processes, and I left the room thinking that journalists had simplified everything too much, and that they were not very good journalists. On the television, however, I could see that the students had actually said exactly what the journalists had written down. So what happened was that the students that understood perfectly the complexity of the processes could not actually elaborate on that verbally. To express the history, to talk about the complexity is difficult for students, but they do understand it. Now, the difficulty lies in finding the evidence to prove that this is actually working. So this is a challenge that we are facing with the project History and Video Games, to find the evidence and find the way to assess the students so that we can prove that we are just starting to detect, that is, to reflect a very powerful historical reality. Are there any examples of players who have learned a lot with a video game? Since we were not that successful in our summer camp, I decided to go to the different schools, and there's this project by Fundación Telefónica about the interactive generation, where they use a concept that I was very interested in, which is the heavy users, children who are really excelling at using new technologies. And I do not have time to elaborate on this, but what we were looking for were the skills that these children were developing. I found Magic 1, Business Boy 1. Business Boy 1 was caught by his parents on the verge of opening a company when he was only 10. He was about to go to the public notary to sign the creation of the company. What the others do is simply incredible. So what we were looking for through these interviews is how they developed their skills. And what really caught my attention was that the only heavy user was Drone Maker 1. And she was the only one developing critical skills, let's say university level skills. She was the only girl that we interviewed, and she was the only one who was doing this because she was checking her sources. All of them run the researches, and they usually look for their sources, normally in YouTube, but she was checking them, and she didn't trust one single source of information. She was the one who read the most. So these children are developing skills, but we need to pay attention to what sort of skills they are developing with the video games. They are working on their skills, but we really need to put an emphasis on what type of skills they're developing. And to wrap it up, and as a conclusion, I think that it's key that we start running educational research on video games, video game by video game, skill by skill, little detail by little detail. This takes time, this takes money, and I cannot do it myself. I'm working very slowly, very gradually in my small field, which is history. But since I'm here, and I think that there might be other people who are interested in this, I think it's a very good forum to put this on the table. The IAV has already used the research run by the three researchers from the Netherlands in order to prove that there's a great potential in video games, but we need interesting demonstrations, interesting proofs in order to shut people like some American presidents that I can think of when they talk ill about video games, but only research that is a serious research that is done by serious universities in a serious way. This is the only way to prove that video games teach and what they teach. So that would be it from me. Thank you.
Y Diego, te voy a hacer esto no estaba previsto, pero te quiero hacer una pregunta.
We had not planned for this, but I wanted to ask you a question. What's the attitude of teachers when you tell them about the possibility of teaching history through video games? Let me explain myself. Do you see any difference between the different age segments? Let's say that the elder teachers do not feel too comfortable and the younger ones do feel comfortable, or maybe this is a wrong theory. No, obviously you are right. A person who is nearing the end of his or her career in teaching might find a lot of difficulties in incorporating video games, but the real point, the real important aspect is their open-mindedness. And I detect that there are many people who have an open mind, and some people tell me, however, that think that I am just doing silly stuff. But people who give me feedback tend to be open, but I find it difficult for them to start playing. So I find it difficult to find a teacher who really feels like taking up video games. Not everybody needs to like playing video games, and that's a bit more complicated. I understand that in public schools there's no specific training for teachers in terms of video games. What we're seeing in public schools, and regional governments are including them in their academic curriculum, is the programming, things like Scratch, or Microsoft is also introducing Microsoft Education with Minecraft, for instance. These are things that are already included in the academic agenda, and it's being developed by the different teacher training centers. So we have that already, but there's still a long way to go before this becomes a subject taught at school. But in Navarra, for instance, we have Scratch already, and learning how to program a little bit should be done by all the schools. We are opening the path, and I think that we can be proud of what we're seeing in the recently, but there's a long way to go still. Íñigo, thank you very much. Let's move to a roundtable on the development of skills through gaming and cognitive issues related to the video games interaction. We have two guests, Aroa Caminero, specialist in psychology, educational psychology. She works in the Álava Reyes Center. And we have Zhuxuan Zhao, who is a doctor in education and specialist in educational development. And this will be moderated by Borja Baz, who is a professor in the Universidad Europea de Madrid. The floor is yours.
Bueno.
Well, Aroa, Zhuxuan, we'll start sharing with the audience what's your profile, your field of knowledge, and how you have, what's your relation with video games. Well, my name is Aroa Caminero. First, I'd like to thank the conference organizer for inviting me, because it is a pleasure to provide a presentation on health, on the field of health, which is linked with video games. I'm a children's psychologist and I work in a psychology center, so I'm always in contact with parents, children and teenagers, and as you can imagine, video games are a central topic. We get many questions from parents and we get many comments from children about video games. And so I know this roundtable is on the development of cognitive skills, but I like also to focus on the social and emotional side, because we can, with video games, we can also develop some skills which are emotional skills and social skills. Well, that's enough for presentation. Well, my name is Xiao Zhuxuan. I'm from Beijing, and the contact with video games I started in 1989 when I was 3 years old. So I'm a gamer still. I came to Spain to study a master's program on Spanish linguistics. And then a teacher, one of my teachers, the professors, offered me to prepare a thesis on video games. So I started working in the school Príncipe de Asturias of the Autónoma, and then with my online group. Well, the goal of this research was first to tell everybody that all these prejudices about video games all over the world, China, Spain, the US, when there's something wrong, is a gamer, a video gamer, no matter if it has mental illness or anything else, it's just a video gamer. And also that there's this idea that girls don't play, that video games are about shooting and killing people, and we want to tell people that video game is much more than that. And we want also to analyze children and parents and the way they can cooperate in a video game and do some teamwork and also share experiences. When you learn something new, you have to teach others. And also this virtual reality world. Well, I think we can start listing the different skills that we can develop with video games, because probably people in the audience, they have some experience with video games, and you know that one of the things is that, of course, there's a wide range, but they are not simple, so they are demanding. In the basic design, first thing you do is a document called the game design document, and it must specify the user skills, so what the skills players need. So depending on the game, on the experience that we are developing, we will ask the gamer to develop some specific skills. So I'd like you to list some of these skills and how they can be used. I'd like to take the opportunity of what Shushan has said about these prejudices on video games. The comments we get from parents are related with this. They have prejudices about the violence, the aggressiveness of some video games, also some gender prejudices, and also the immersive effect, what is called by someone the digital autism. And so it's important that we can tell parents and the general public that video games, when they are used in the right way, with parental supervision, when there's an alternative leisure, not only video games, they have the ability to develop some skills which are social skills and are very important. For example, well, if we think of Fortnite and other online games where you need teamwork, we can see that they are similar to the social part of the real life. In video games, we use video games in the clinic to teach them how to do teamwork, get to a common goal, to see if everyone is coordinating their efforts. Also, allocation of roles, assessment if we are doing what we should do. Also, expressing one's mind, and also having the ability to mediate in conflicts with others to find some common points. And I think the social part is very important, and it can be developed with this kind of games. Personally, one of the examples I could contribute is like 2 years ago I started to play a role play, which is Final Fantasy XIV, and to win on this game you need a specific profile. There's 3 things. You can be the tank, a healer, and the violent guy. If no one is doing things seriously, the tank has to protect everyone in the team. The healer has to provide support, and the damage maker are the ones that overcome the challenges. And there is a chat. This game has a very accessible community, and people take things seriously, but at the same time, on the chat, the ones that come for the first time are educated on what they have to do. They are educated on different mechanics, because the designers of the game, or the healers of the game, they design different mechanics. So if you do things your way, you won't overcome the dungeons. You have to do the tasks, your tasks, and you have to fulfill your role. But there's always this companionship feeling that actually at the end, when we overcome, this is what we get. Well, I'll tell you an anecdote of something that we have seen in children from 2nd, 4th, and 6th grade. At first we thought we would do some research with them, and we invited a girl from Activision, from the company, and she brought the Skylander game. She had everything prepared, and that time the game had not been released, so the children had never played the game. So she was prepared to teach children how to play. Children would ignore her totally. Children would take the console and play by themselves. They had some discussions among them, and it was surprising that nobody told them that you are the leader, you have to do things. Nobody told them anything, and in a natural way, a girl was chosen as the leader. There was a limited time. Each one has a limited time to play. We had like 1 hour, 4 children. And the girl said right away, okay, I will leave my right to play first, but you will follow my orders. I will tell you what you have to do when you play. You have played 10 minutes, and then the other boy plays. And then when there was one of the problems they have to solve, some children are better to control the character, but they don't know how to overcome this difficulty. But there was another child that didn't want to play, to touch the console, but he was watching with attention, and then he told another children, you go here, you go here, you go there. And he solved the problem. So it's very interesting to see this, how they cooperate, how they realize who's better doing one thing and who's better the other thing, and how to use these skills to overcome difficulties. Well, yes, roles are very important when we are doing teamwork, because at the end of the day, video games are challenges and we have to overcome them. And also this is related with the social skills that we can see in all cooperation games, and also games that are not cooperation games. If you have played a game like Life is Strange with some friends there, and you have to make decisions, and these games might be designed for just one player, but we can have a collective experience. This is why there is some streaming experiences, because some people want to have someone else and want to communicate while they're playing. But also this, not only this social aspect, I'd like to know about this cognitive aspect. We'll speak about the different cognitive skills: memory, problem solving, lateral thinking, spatial vision. What can you tell us? Well, it is important also to understand that each video game is different and needs different skills. But in general, video games develop the executive function. This is the ability that we have to organize our behavior to reach a final goal. It includes processes like planning. We need to know what steps I need to follow to overcome the difficulties. I have to learn how to establish priorities. In some strategy video games, you have to be clear what you need, what weapons, what resources in order to develop other resources. You need to assess whether you are fulfilling your goals. You have also to make decisions to reach a final common goal. And sometimes you are not using logics or the normal solutions, but you need to think outside the box. You need lateral thinking to get to this solution in different ways. And there's also an emotional part for this called executive function: memory, problem solving, etc. We have also to take into account the emotional regulation function. In order to make decisions, to plan, we need to have tolerance to frustration. We need motivation, an ability to fight for success, and this can also be developed with video games, because if there is a failure, we don't success. First, we have to keep on trying and have to overcome our frustration to be able to get our goals. Well, if we just say Dark Souls, we develop great tolerance to frustration. But if we focus on lateral thinking, I can think of a Nintendo game, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is very innovative because Nintendo has given us many tools. It has created a huge open world with a physics engine and a chemistry engine, very interesting, very few indications. You start the game and they tell you, well, there's a castle, you have to do something, you cannot go this way, but you have all this world and you have to make do. And you have all these challenges and there are thousands of ways to overcome them. So the designers have not closed the game in a very specific ways, because Zelda always had puzzles, but it was guided. But this is totally free. You have the ability to manage some powers and then some physics engine, and it's about innovation. So, Xu, do you have any example of how creativity, innovation, lateral thinking can be applied to this type of video games? Well, the most famous one is Minecraft. Well, I understand that most of the people in the audience are players, are gamers, and if you can look up on YouTube the creation of players in YouTube, it blows my mind. They can build a whole castle or a complete copy of a real life city using the physics of the game. This is mind blowing. This maybe is 3 or 4 people working together, and some of these has taken maybe 7-8 years of work to do it. So it's a creation process, and also you need a good deal of patience. Well, Minecraft is very famous, but video games as a way of expressing, they are very creative, but we also have more defined video games, like the example of Zelda, where the expression of the player is by using some tools and by overcoming some challenges that have not, in a way that had not been thought by the designers. And this takes me to the deduction skills. One of the most famous games in the 1990s were the graphic adventures. All these stories of pixel art were very interesting stories, but you had some puzzles that were, some of them were very complicated. And also this need to be investigator and you need deductive skills. I have a problem, I need to solve it, and all I have is my mind. Well, of course, that implies that you have to develop some other cognitive processes which are not deduction, like finding information, also building hypotheses, what can work, what cannot work, and also using the scientific method by mistake and success until you get to the final solution. That helps you to feel this way. And I say this because when you have solved a problem or when you have reached the solution of a video game, this helps you develop your self-esteem, because in video games you don't have the pressure if you fail or the pressure of being assessed. You have many opportunities to try. You can be as creative as you want. Nobody's judging you, and this helps. It gives you most opportunities to develop all these cognitive processes, and the final result is that at an emotional level you feel good. Well, there's another prejudice by parents that said that gamers are stupid. They just, all they do is just press on a button. But this is not true. Gamers are very smart, very intelligent. A friend of mine, he's a video game developer or designer, and he said that no matter what you design, gamers will always find a way to break in. So, as Aroa has said, if you fail in the video games, there are no consequences on the real world. So, you have no fear. You could just try. What if I do this? What will happen if I do this? So, you are always trying to how to break down borders. And this is a two-way process. Also, the designer sees that someone has broken in through one limit, and he builds it in a different way, and then gamers try to break in again. So it is a mutual learning. Actually, I think that in Zelda Breath of the Wild, one of the challenges was how to break the game. And then there's the phenomenon of the speed runners, which is people that are very fast in completing games, in solving games, but I see no point in it because I enjoy playing it. But speed runners, they do lots of field work. They know the game very well. They know how it works. They know the underlying system, the underlying code, and they know how to use it to their advantage for a specific goal, which is solving it very fast. In this line also, we have more complex problems in video games. We have all types of video games, but actually when we face very complicated challenges, some of them very demanding on intellectual level, some of them very demanding in terms of brain-hand coordination. So what's this process, and how about this, where do we get this perseverance? Well, there are some features to video games that activate motivation and that have us immersed in video games. They are very motivating. The visual elements, the audio elements keep us engaged to the video game. And also the worlds that they have, they are usually very creative, or they represent things that call our attention. Another thing is that we are agent stakeholders of the process, and this is why we are immersed and we improve in motivation and we are engaged to the video game. And also very important is what we have said before. I think that the key of how we engage is that video games are very related with the brain structures related with pleasure. So we are activating the locus accumbens and all the reward system of the brain. So we have to be careful with parental control, control of the time that we spend players, but this is the thing that keeps us engaged, so engaged to these games, because it's very rewarding and acts on the pleasure circuits of the brain. Well, most video games are very complex. First, most of them they just show you the most basic things, are tutorials. There are very long tutorials that I get asleep with them. But so they tell you the basics, and then there's a real difficulty, and then you have to do some research, you have to try, do some practice, you have to find out what resources you have available. Many role or action games, you have some skill points and this is about the skills that are given to you by the designer, and you have to say, okay, I'm not doing very well on this skill. Why is this? Maybe if I do things in a different way, I'll get a better score. And also this triggers discussions between gamers. If you see some chats of gamers, they are discussing, I do things this way, you have to do this other way. And I was a coordinator of race, where we work, for example, in Star Wars of Old Republic. We have to do a task. So first, I need to learn all players where they are weak, where are their weaknesses, and I have to tell them to practice for their role. They have to reflect upon what they are doing, because they have to reflect upon their strategies they are using, and this has to be done in a millisecond. If something unexpected happens, what you will do. For me, this is very demanding mental work. Well, we could speak much longer about, for example, virtual reality, because this is a new language. It's starting slowly. There are some virtual reality devices, virtual rigs, and this is where we're innovating in the ways we have to communicate with the fiction worlds, because for the immersion we don't have the limitation of the screen, but the world is around us. We have to develop a new design language. So I'd like to ask you if you have any thoughts on the ways to interact with virtual environments that are more kinesthetic. How we move, do we need to simulate more specific actions, and how do you see that where is virtual reality, how is it going to develop? Well, based on my experience in psychology, virtual reality is something that we use a lot in the clinic for the treatment of many diseases, for many cases. One of the use that we do is for phobias, against phobias. If we have a phobia, we need to expose ourselves to this phobia. So we can do this with virtual reality glasses. They give you this possibility to be in this environment that generates anxiety for you, and you have the ability to regulate the intensity. So I think in the health field, this is a very useful tool, as patients can improve much faster, and it's very free. There's no judgment of the people around. So video games are very useful in the field of psychology. Well, I don't know if you have seen the movie Ready Player One. This is the dream of all gamers in a virtual world where you can do all these things. Well, this technology is being developed now, but we have seen a great development both of virtual reality and also augmented reality. For example, now I work in the Confucius Institute in Madrid, where we teach Chinese and Chinese culture. And for example, in China, we've got Chinese games to learn, and then what you've got, you can use augmented reality, and you see the different characters, the dragons, and they dance. So basically, to use technology, to use virtual reality technology for real things. For example, the phenomenon Pokemon Go, which is virtual or augmented reality that also implies some physical effort and also a virtual side. I think this is the future, but what I'm not sure is that it will replace all video games, because there are some video games that work better without virtual reality. For example, the SimCities games, the management games. I think this is a very good aspect of the video games of the future, and it helps you to feel within the virtual world. But okay, let's see where we are in 5 years. Well, I think that the virtual age is going to replace some games. There are some genres that will have to be invented. new ways of understanding, but of course it's clear that traditional games will stay with us for a long time. Well, we're almost done, and I'd like to mention something we said before about the risk-reward relationship. This is one of the main axes of the design of video games. We have to face a challenge. We might lose. This is like a test. If we fail, we have the motivation to try again, to learn based on our failure. And always we get the example that the death and the death pleasure cycle is a way of learning. It's always clear what you have done wrong, what you could have done other way, and then when you face this new challenge and you overcome it, you get a dopamine shot to your brain that's very rewarding. So what do you want to say about this risk-reward relationship? I think something interesting that you have said is that once you have failed, you think, what have I done? What could I have done otherwise? And this is what we call metacognition, is to analyze what the strategies we are implementing to get to a final goal and how we can change them. And I think this metacognitive part of realizing where we made a mistake and doing things differently, this is something that we can develop with video games. And I forgot to say that another feature is that even though many times you fail and you have to try again, but video games have like a rewarding system which is very immediate, very short time. Sometimes when you get a milestone, you get a little reward, and that keeps your dopamine levels high, and this is why we continue. And this is why I think that it is a very good educational tool in the classrooms or at home with the family, because with other things we might not try again, but this is a very good tool to lead to significant learnings. Well, I think that most video games now work on this balance between challenge and reward. Because the challenge itself is a reward. This is what we say, but still you need something more. I think that if any of you have done an MMO, if you have a very difficult ride and you work with a group during 1 or 2 months, you fail again until you find a way, and then the very moment when you overcome it, the feeling of satisfaction, of success, I cannot put it into words. I had to scream in front of the computer. But then most video games have a rewarding system. They give you a better weapon or a title or a certificate where you can show, I have done this, I have accomplished this. But if not, the feeling is like, okay, I have done all this for nothing. And I think this also different compared to some schools. This is a challenge given to gamers, to players, and they have to solve it because of their own satisfaction or because there is a reward. It's not an order, like you have to do this. Well, it's clear that we can see that the book of the design of video games has many things to contribute to many fields like education, health, work relationships. Also, there is the field of gamification, which has received lots of criticism, which is using the more superficial parts of video games like scores and rewards, and try to use it to raise productivity. And actually, Jan Rost discusses this on how this can be abused and used in a wrong way. So this is a very open field where there's lots of knowledge, but as a final message, can you give us a final message on gamification and how it's getting into different fields? Well, I know that in my former school is now using civilization to teach world history, because civilization has some scientific and political development lines, and it also teaches you, for example, if you have city on the coast, you have to develop your technology, your I don't know how you say it in Spanish, this marine, the sea technology, the technology that uses water, and it not only gives you a famous sentence, and it combines it with technology, and then you have to know what historic situation has led everyone to develop this technology. Well, this is very important, but this is something that China has tried and has failed, which is designing a video game specifically for education. That does not work. Using a video game designed for education, using a normal video game and finding an educational use, that works, but designing an educational video game does not work, because it focused on teaching, not on playing. So first it has to be a game, and then you must find it an educational potential. Children get bored with educational games, but in civilization, all children, they love it. They want, if I want nuclear technology, what do I need to develop first to get there? And I think this is related with the fact that if we introduce the element play, that disconnects the brain. There's no resistance, so there's not the feeling that this is mandatory learning, formal learning, and this is used for the development of human resources in companies. Once we introduce a game as a difference, the psychological resistance disappears, and then we get more motivation, we get more engaged, and all the learning that we need to do works much better. Well, as a final message, I like to say that one of the main failures is that when games, or what we understand as edutainment, when games are not focusing on fun, on entertainment, this is when they don't work, because we don't get any more motivation. And also, as for motivation, which has also this dark side, we're getting some informations about social credit. This way of fostering a certain behavior, a certain way of thinking, which is socially accepted. And actually, games, they have a lot to contribute, but if there's a wrong use of games, there's a potential for controlling people, also we could say at state level and also at corporation level. So we have to be alert that these principles are not perverted. And I think that this is enough. We have now time for a few questions.
Así que si alguien...
So if someone feels inclined to ask a question, please feel free to do so. I see that someone there has a question. I think we have time at least for a couple of questions. Hello?
Buenas.
My name is Manuel. I am a video game developer. I'm currently studying my degree, and I have enjoyed everyone's comments, and especially Aroa's, because I'm interested in a project dealing with phobias and fear handling through video games. And I have a question for you. My question has many parts to it. We know that immersion and textures in video games sometimes can place the gamers in a situation where they are too deep into the game. Are there any people who are too sensitive to immersion? And if this were so, is this any type of pathology, any reality distortion? How can you handle that? How would you keep this exposure bit of the phobia under control? Well, in the psychological field, there's not a specific profile that can be most sensitive to this, but we take into account the environment, the context of the person, how inclined they are to join in a game, and how inclined they are to leave aside any other responsibilities in favor of the game. So this has to do with many factors. It's not related to one single characteristic. So in psychology, what we do is we run a global assessment of that person, the characteristics of the personalities and the environment in which they live, especially when it comes to children and teenagers. So if we see that there is this electronic autism and everyone finds it very difficult to get you out of there, and you have a very explosive reaction, and you have you feel deprived of this, and so for this there are many techniques that you can apply, or many methodologies, like restricting time every day, and also facilitate other leisure options, and in as much as possible that these options are related to dealing with social situations with teenagers. It's also very important to see how the family works out, what type of education they're implementing, if they have too many limits, or if they're taking into account the type of games that the minor is playing, etc. Does this answer your question? Any other question? Somebody else wants to ask a question? We have another question over there. Hello, my name is Rodrigo. I'm a colleague. I'm studying the same degree as Manuel, and you were talking about reward systems, so about failing and repeating. You've talked about repeating again and again one thing until you manage to get your goal. And my question is, what do you think about the concept of failing again and again until you get your goal, and also the phenomenon of quitting, when a person just fails a game completely and they say, I really cannot handle this game, I'm going to drop it, because there are many difficult games, and there has been a debate about they're having an easy mode. So my question would be, a video game developer and director should take this into account and maybe deal with this when it comes to the artistic vision. Well, this is something that they have. This is a debate that's going on. Some games have a single mode, and they say all the gamers will have the same experience when they play this game. So this is a matter of learning and overcoming all the trials within the game. Now, we see here the problem. If when it comes to gamers who have maybe any disability or who are less able with the controls, if they can really be discriminated against when it comes to enjoying the narrative of the game. This is a topic that is very current. There are arguments for and against each option. Personally, I think that video game developers should be free to develop their games the way they want, and to restrict them really opposes their business interests, because they want to, because if they think that this message is what they want to keep, they're free to do so, even if they're not comprehensive games from the user's viewpoint. That's right. It's important to have maybe an easy mode for all games. When we are learning to do something, we have a certain area that allows us to come from my first initial level of skill to the one that I am aiming for. If I cannot fulfill this gap, I might feel demotivated or frustrated. So it could be interesting to have different levels of difficulty in the games, because they promote the addiction, so to speak, of the gamer, and it's easier for us to feel more motivated and inclined to keep on playing. Obviously, it's a decision that needs to be done by the designer or the director, but well, this particular game that you mentioned earlier is very specific, and it's true that it doesn't have an easy mode. Most of the games that we see on the market, that are blockbusters, have different modes and can be adapted to different types of players. Also, what I don't like right now is that we think that any game should attract everyone, but that's simply not possible. They have each their own target. When you try to really attract everyone, nobody will be attracted by it. There will be all sorts of games, all types of genres, and each gamer will find a game that suits their likes. And I think with this we can close this round table. Thank you, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes break, about 20 minutes. We will be back about 12:30 or 25 to 1. We will be seeing Belén Mainer. She works in the University of Vitoria, and she will tell us about the university degrees related to video games, what you can do in the labor market afterwards. So if you're considering working in this field, the next presentation is perfect for you. See you in a few minutes.
Different track.
Go back to sleep. 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 Go back to sleep.
Bueno, bienvenidos a todos de nuevo.
Welcome everyone. Let us give some time for those who are a bit late. I want to introduce our next guest, Belén Maynard Blanco. She is professor in video gaming, and she's going to tell us about how to make a career out of video game developing, what are the possibilities that you will find in the labor market. And just to place you in context, let me give you two figures. The video game industry had a turnover only in Spain of 1.5 billion euro. Is this a lot or is this little? This is 3 times as much as the film industry made, and 3 times as much as the amount made by the music industry as a whole. So this will give us an idea of what the video game industry is about. So Belén, the floor is yours. Well, as it has been said, Belén is the main person responsible of the video gaming studies in the University of Victoria, and I wanted to take the opportunity today of going in depth in the most academic aspect of the video games, which is what we like more. There are many students coming from different careers, and they might be undergraduates or studying a master's degree, and what they usually find in this type of education is about how to program or model. But university should have a little bit more than that. Before Bologna, it was a center for knowledge and reflection. So should the video games be outside this reflection? Well, in our opinion, they shouldn't. And I would like to start talking about why video games should make it to the universities. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Borja, and thank Fundación Telefónica for organizing these event on video games, because this is something that reflects the fact that video games are a science made of sciences, because we need to really coordinate all the parts that are encompassed by the development of a video game. We think that something very important for the video game developers is very important to know what this week is about, that will give them a wider view of what video games are about. When they ask me the question that you just made, I'm a bit shocked, because I think that this is a question that we encounter every weekend, every month, every year. Is our video games degree a university degree? Yes, they are indeed. They are here in our country since not so long ago, maybe less than 10 years, but it is a degree in Europe, and the first degree was created in Copenhagen in 1991. They have a doctorate, a PhD program, and in many other countries in Europe we see that studying video gaming is something normal, and as the options that youngsters find for the future, they can undertake video gaming studies. Sometimes we think that we are very innovative and very modern, and we are, because this is a very relaxed and informal type of industry. But when you really dig into what the video game industry is about, you realize that people are very serious, and that making video games is very difficult, and to make it fun, to sell it well, it's extremely hard. So yes, well, taking the opportunity of the fact that you've mentioned the Copenhagen University and other big names in the States like Janet Murray, and you invited Clara Fernandez Vara very recently, and they were also in the Georgia Tech University in the States. And I would like to mention the Game Studies, which is the name of the journal by Ben Arsen, this Norwegian person who started talking about cybertext by the end of the 90s, and the ludology as well. He opened this journal where the scientific papers are presented, those papers who are the most looked for within this world. What are the game studies? Can you define them? Well, this is an excellent question as well, because we have a university degree, so we need to be attached to a science. In this case, it's game studies derived from ludology, and Mr. Anders was here to give us a wider view of what this gaming studies is about. He is older than us, and he couldn't study video games in Norway. So what he did was starting the new gaming studies in Copenhagen in 1991. And if we talk about university quality, we find that this journal that he created is the top tier. In 2001, he published an article called Game Studies Year 1, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, we already have the industry because video games have been around for 50 years. It's a technological version of the traditional game. And I like saying that one of the first video games was born in the university. We have Douglas, who created the Tic-Tac-Talk in university in England. There's another one, first one that was more focused in the programming aspect. He wanted to show how to intercept missiles, and he created a game where you would launch a missile and you had to intercept it. And he just created it so that his students studied programming. He wanted to do something fun so they would learn how to program, and he thus created the first video game in history. And he found his classrooms were filled with people trying to learn how to program. So video games teaches a lot, but I think that universities have been very important because they were the first ones who were able to research a new science, and they have contributed a lot to the video game industry. Anderson said that there were many master's degree, we had undergraduate courses, and we have different technical training, we have the industry, we have the culture, because it's very important to say that among the general public, this is not understood very clearly, that video games are culture. They are included under the Ministry of Culture. They've been considered culture by the Spanish ministry for many years already. There's employability, we have the creative industry that has the best turnover, and the game studies are born in 2001. And this was not just something he said, but because there was a clear environment for this new art to grow and expand. Game studies actually encompass a great number of disciplines. Obviously, video games have different shapes and they can be approached in many different ways, but we have big names like Juan Carlos Frasca, who established the difference between the ludos and the paira, and all these. I am a university professor as well, and I've realized that students do not get this knowledge. They focus in the programming and the animation side of video games, which is what is requested by the industry. But I would like to really talk in favor of this theoretical approach, and I would like to ask you, what do you think it can give you to get in touch with all these researchers, all these people who talk about philosophers and the video games and the difference between what's beautiful and what's sublime? What can this add to the training and the education of a future video game worker? I think this is key. Sometimes the industry has been overlapped and even overpassed by technological innovation. Every time that we could have access to further technology, we could do more. But the first thing that students who choose video gaming for their studies need to do is to create a video game. So we have really stressed the basic ones, the basic things like the building. When it's like when we build a house, but you need to have a reason to build a house or a motivation to build a house. Earlier, they were talking about this being a process or a product. Video games, as we define the magic circle, which is where I'm actually inside a parallel fiction and I can actually play within it. We are homo ludens. We are capable of playing. Children are not taught to play. They play naturally, and we never stop playing. We just transform the games that we play. So we have the opportunity through the gaming, through the games, of creating a connection with people that is very straightforward, because we have a simulation, we have an interaction. For instance, with a movie, I can stop the movie and I can pick up the phone while the movie is on. But for the game to move forward, you need to play it. You need the direct action of the user. This direct action from the user needs to have a meaning for the user. Sometimes it's not about reaching the end of the game. Sometimes I've entered an MMO game just to fish, and I've been playing fishing with my sister, who is 200 kilometers away from me, and this has been a meeting point for us too. And at the same time, we are fishing and we are developing our fishing skill. This is an end in itself. I do not need to accomplish any mission or to finish the game. And sometimes when I finish the game, I say to myself, I loved this game, I'm going to replay it, but I'm not going to be the good guy now, I'm going to be the evil one. So what we are studying in universities is the meaning of these games. That we want students to create video games, but they need the technical skills for this, but they also need to reflect on what things this video game is providing the user and what needs the users have when they are facing a game. We do not have one single game for everyone. There's a game for each of us. We are talking about people who might like complex gamings, and we're talking about very different types of games, and this is what we are looking for from universities.
In this sense, do you believe that the relationship between the academia and the industry could be developed further? Because sometimes it seems there's no cooperation. They don't really connect. How do you see this link, this relationship nowadays in Spain? Well, I believe there is a need that the academia and the industry work together. Each has a different role. The academia, universities, they keep the knowledge, they invest on science, on research, and in improving society. This is what we also do from the gaming industry. We have a very rich environment where we have freedom. There is an equity of opportunities for students, and then depending on each one's capabilities, they get more rewards or less. You can leverage your university experience or not. Of course, if you are thinking of taking a university degree, you should understand that university is an integrated training space where you're going to develop specific skills but also personal skills. Well, we have a good deal to contribute to the industry. For example, this Minecraft League, the final league was in Madrid last year, and it was surprising how challenges that were planned for 40 minutes could be overcome in 20 minutes by very young people. So it was surprising how this educational league, how powerful it was. And now we are in this league and we want to be part of this league, so we are cooperating with providing challenges for the young people. How do we do this? We are not teachers. We have heard a lot here about learning, and we are not teachers. We are creative. If you're a filmmaker, you do AV. If you are in gaming, you are creative. Then, for example, in the health field, how should we motivate? How can we motivate patients? In education, how to teach some chemistry contents. Well, we don't know about this, but we can build worlds that foster these developments. And another concern is the stigma that still exists in Spain, at least, maybe not in other countries, the stigma on video games. Do you think this is a generational issue, an age issue, or how complicated some video games are because there are many buttons that you have to push and the first reaction is to reject it? And also there's the paradox that this is something complex, but at the same time video games are associated to something that's not intellectual, that's not intellectually demanding, while we have seen that it is actually quite on the contrary. So you need some deduction and intellectual skills. There are some games that are very demanding, not only giving you some content, some history, but they let you understand how diplomacy works, how you build some resources. So what do you think of this stigma? Well, video games are a channel of communication that we use to tell stories through a new channel, a new art to our users and players. It's something new, and this has arrived, and it's making more money than music and filmmaking together. Also, there is a fear against the unknown. It's a fear of the unknown. Someone that has never played and can see this power of immersion, this power to deliver pleasure to young people, you might think, what's going on here? What are they consuming? What are my children doing? And I said, okay, I think it's okay to be concerned about this. We have a duty to explain why we think that video games are culture. This is our role, and in some years' time it will be accepted that this is culture and that this is an art. I focused on this on my PhD thesis. There was some medical prescription many years ago that the ladies that thought that could be taken by a night to the east, then the prescription from the doctor was not to read. I have 2 little girls, and when we are with friends, I say, my daughter reads. So this is seen as something positive, while before it was like getting strange ideas, weird ideas, and getting some fantasies. So it's clear that we should not fear video games. They are very good for cultural dissemination, and we should speak about this also to the public. And last, as for the job opportunities and how is the industry now in Spain, because due to several reasons there is not such industrial fabric as compared to other countries. How do you see this with your students, their job opportunities? Well, as I said at the beginning, video gaming is a science of sciences. You need many sciences to build video games, so there are more job opportunities. You can have art, audiovisual, programming, interactive design. So there are many cultural industries that are parallel, or for example on the health field, I can develop something for the health industry. So there are lots of demand from many industries for interactive content. So there are many opportunities. Of course, if you are learning video games, you are thinking, I want to be in a studio to design a commercial entertainment game. So there's lots of demand, and it's growing. And also there's demand for studies. And it is true that this is growing in Spain each year, year after year. We are growing in triple A's and also other kinds of studies. There is also duty to the Ministry for Culture, the industry, the professionals, the developers, to create these local contents, to foster local contents. There are different formulae to do this. But what's true is that the studios nowadays, they are playing a risk when they release a Spanish video game. If we compare with Denmark, they have 3 times as much as index studies compared to Spain, and there are many factors that help them being more productive. I have never been in a studio in Europe where there's not a Spanish professional. Of course, we are all over the world, and this is the end of this part. Thanks, Belén.
Vamos a hablar ahora de...
Now we'll speak about a field that might not seem to be related with gaming, which is health. There are other fields where gaming is being used in a very fruitful way, and this will be explained by our next presenter. And this is in issues that's related with the recovery of patients that have mobility issues, balance issues, or coordination issues. Julio Alvarez will present on this. He's responsible of the health department of the company Virtualware. Well, thank you very much. I got this presentation. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share with you what we're doing at Virtualware. And my presentation will focus on showing you some examples of applications of the video game technology in the health field and also the limitations. I want to explain what a serious game is. You all know this and the technologies it uses. But also, in terms of treatments, medical treatments, it is important to understand that treatments and drugs don't work if they are not applied. And therefore, all these terms are key. Compliance with the treatment is key if we are prescribed an antibiotic because we have an infection and we have to take it 3 times a day for 4 or 5 days, and we don't do it, we become resistant to the virus, and then the drug won't work, and this is a serious problem. So treatments and drugs don't work if we don't take them. And what can gaming and gamification contribute to the health field? If we are able to motivate patients in a different way, if we are able to provide more entertainment, it will be easier for patients to comply with therapies, and this will have an effect on the efficacy of treatments and drugs. Gamification can be very useful. We have heard a lot about gamification. We have seen examples of a standard gamification with the typical mechanics of game scoring, but also gamification can be done very well with previous study, a game design document, and also analysis of potential target of patients. This picture, this is a device we bought in 2004 in a project with the University of Deusto. These are virtual reality glasses. The price was 100,000 euros, and there was the size of a room. If you use them nowadays, they are useless because technology develops very fast. We have autonomous cars, these Tetris. I used to play. As you know, I'm 25 years old. You can see now the level of realistic images that we have is mind-blowing. How about health? There's a problem with health and the adoption of new technologies. That's very curious. In the world of health, there's been has developed a lot. It is very complicated in health to adapt to technologies as they are developed, because anything that's related with health must be tested and validated, and that needs investment and also the approval of patients and health professionals. In the technology evolution over the last years, we have focused on immersive technologies. So virtual reality and augmented reality, mixed reality glasses, headsets, and there are some devices nowadays that are very different to the ones we had 10 years ago. That means that we can use all these tools. They are available and inexpensive. So we have developed some tools that could be inspiring, or at least they are interesting. This is aesthetics for video games that we are using for a space negligence rehab program. These our players here are not only young people, are patients of any age. One example, this project we created it. This is a serious game, a graphic adventure. This is a social cognition rehabilitation program. The patient enters this program following the treatment protocol established by the psychologist, and then he or she must make decisions within this graphic adventure, and then we analyze these decisions to help the physician diagnose. So this is an application where we use an immersive tool which is very fun and is totally different. This child, usually this is prescribed to young patients, enters this graphic, which is like 2 or 3 hours long, makes decisions, speaks with different people, and everything is registered and analyzed. Another example, I wanted to bring you this example because I think it's interesting, but this is not gaming technology. This is just a tool that we have developed with the King's College, and we're working on it, and on a new version for psychiatrics for patients with paranoid diseases. Here we have a patient with paranoid ideations. We give them the virtual reality headset and we present them with a situation in a bar, in an Irish pub, and there's people looking at them and speaking about them. The therapist is speaking with sitting by the patient and speaking with the patient. As we have heard before, the treatment of phobias, we have to expose users to a specific stimulus. And here you can choose what you want to do. As for training, our physicians, they have been trained, they have read, but they really like to have gamification tools to learn in a different way and to get scientific knowledge, new mechanisms of actions, of drugs, etc. If around this training program we add some storytelling, we create story, we have them travel throughout different countries, speak with different people, that helps in the acquisition of knowledge. Another example of solving clinical cases, this is an example that we have developed with the Spanish Society of Neurology. They had a problem that young people were not choosing neurology, and they wanted to develop a awareness raising program to disseminate knowledge about neurology and the work of neurologists. This is designed for young people. This is an adventure, a graphic adventure, where they meet a neurologist. They see the diseases that the neurologist treats. They visit some patients. There are some challenges. They have to get some scores. So also gamification, a very appealing project also. Another training tool that we have just released, implemented in the European Conference for Pharma Lab, is we submerge 4 neurologists at the same time in a training environment within the CNS, where they can interact with the system and with themselves. They can see each other. This is a new technology that has been released by HTC. It was validated last year, and I think we have been the first one to implement it. And after us, there have been other applications. They can visit the CNS and they see how the T cells work within the European body, the human body. This commercial tool. And now I will be showing you some specific examples on what I want to present here, how to apply video games to neurorehabilitation. These are projects where we have worked. This is a beautiful one because I think it's the most powerful we have now. It's second year of development. This tool has been, or it's been validated by patients. The Kessler Foundation is a non-profit foundation from the US. If you think of Christopher Reeve, where when he had his accident riding on horseback, he went to get some rehabilitation in this center, and they are researching on new ways to treat problems associated with stroke, with brain stroke. One of them is visual neglect. This is an attention deficit. Patients that have had a stroke, one of the sides, they can see the left side or the right side. They see it, but they forget it. If you ask them to paint on a circle the 12 hours, they start on one side from 1 to 6, or from 1 to 6 to 12. This is a serious problem because there is an area that you can see, but you don't register it. But due to neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to reconduct nervous pulses through different ways, this is done through neurorehabilitation, and this is neuroplasticity. So there is a therapy. This is always based on the same thing. There's a standard therapy with some indications, like a patient has to look in front of him, and that has proved that this therapy is useful. And what we have done, we have transformed this traditional therapy in a new tool following the indications by the professionals. We are experts in technology, not in health. So we are creating scenarios. There's a front end and a back end that manages therapies, analyzes data, etc., etc. These programs need to be validated with patients in a very strict ways and with some clinical essays. This is also beautiful. We have developed it with the Spanish Red Cross. Name is hemianopsia. This is the same, a similar problem. There's one side that it's not that you forget it, you see it in black. You see it blank. And there's a therapy, a traditional therapy with peripheral stimuli. And what we do is we give the patient a virtual reality headset and a driving wheel, and he has to drive through a village that we have designed, and there are different stimuli like people crossing the street, etc. And we are extending the visual field of the patient this way. There's also an essay to support this tool and was presented in the conference of the Spanish Society of Neurology. This is more simple, but has also to do with cognitive rehabilitation. This is the Basque Foundation of Multiple Sclerosis in a multi-tactile touch screen. We have introduced different games for cognitive rehabilitation. This is older, but I think it's also very interesting. This was based on the brain training that we saw some years ago, and there was some essays about the usefulness of these games in cognitive stimulation. This is one of the uses of video game technology. If we also introduce a device of to capture movement, a machine like the Kinect, there are different versions that capture or register 20 locations on your body. You can have users undergo some exercises for some rehabilitation exercises, physical exercises, like carrying loads, controlling balance, reaching out with the arms. There are different exercises. This platform, we are selling it in different countries of the world, and it was released in 2011. Another very interesting project related with virtual reality and also with video games. This we have done it with patients of the multiple sclerosis patients, and we have a lab that sponsors this because this is also related with social commitment. And patients that have cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis, they can be stimulated with daily life activities. There's a training in a kitchen where they have to perform some recipes so that they can train calculation, because if they are lacking some ingredient, they have to go to the supermarket and buy what they need. So there are different domains that were specified here. This poster is being presented this year in the conference of the Spanish Society of Neurology. Here we can see other images. This is the recipe selector. The patient is in a room with a headset, and there's a therapist with the patient, because these devices cannot be used by the patient on their own, by patients on their own. They have to choose their recipe, and then in the kitchen they have to open one drawer, the other drawer, and looking for the ingredients that they need for the recipe. It's very simple, but this is in a prototyping phase where we first test the efficacy, and then later, if we need to make it more appealing, we develop that later. Another interface man-machine is this one, which is, you probably know, this one is called Knee Motion. This is about combining health devices with gaming technology, because patients that have physical disabilities, they have problems with the fine motricity of fingers, and this device is able to recognize their hands in a very accurate way, and the goal here is to have the patient move their hands and fingers. So we're not looking for accuracy, but for a motivation for patients to move. Some games, for example, this one is curious because it's based on the Guitar Hero. The Guitar Hero, I think you probably know it, but this scenario is the patient had to do these movements as the notes would appear. What have we found over these years working in the health field? Well, it's complicated sometimes to find a profile of health professional that's able to tell you exactly what they would like to have. If we are bringing together an IT guy with a doctor, they speak different languages, and we have to find some common spaces where they can develop something interesting. And also each patient is different. It is impossible to design a game for a patient if it's so difficult that the patient will be frustrated. So we have to find a balance between the difficulty and the efficacy, because we don't want the patient to be frustrated. Another aspect which is very important in health is this: we cannot release anything in the health field to be used on patients without being tested and validated. And then there are many cases, but I think I have gone enough into detail with these examples of the things that we have developed, and I think that so far, if there are questions, I'll be glad to answer them, and if not, I'm done with this presentation.
No sé si tenéis alguien.
Does anybody have a question? Raise your hands if you have any questions. Go ahead. We cannot hear without the microphone, though.
Hello. So, first of all, thank you very much to the translators who've been doing an amazing job. I think it's just for me, which is interesting, but thank you. Oh no, someone else over there. Hello. So, my question is, you've mentioned a lot of examples here of places where within the medical industry, you know, these VR games and these other games have sort of been implemented. Are there any of these that are publicly available at the moment which you could take a look at to see a further example of, you know, what the kind of effects of the game might be? Are there any examples of how they work which are available online that people like us could access?
Así puedo contestar.
I will answer to everyone in Spanish. He was asking me if there was any example of this type of tools that is available currently for downloading or to test it. So there's a product that we have made. It's a virtualrehab.com where you can see examples and the stories told by people who have used them. But the most spectacular example that I have found up until now is this software called Remission, which is a product that is aimed at, it's a video game that we use with children under chemotherapy, and this video game helps the child destroy the cancer cells in the game. It shows them what the action mechanism is of the product and how the sickness works. They run 2 tests, one of them with chemotherapy, and the game, specific game for this remission game, displayed great results in terms of efficiency, of performance of the products that they were using with the children. I think that this is a very impressive proof of what the mind can do to the action of medicine. I wanted to ask you about the role of physicians, because this technology needs to be implemented so patients can be inclined to using them, but are the systems and the games as intuitive that any physician can use them, or do you find that there are problems with this when it comes to implementation? Well, yeah, we encounter here the believers and the non-believers. It's very difficult to move forward a project with a product or a treatment with patients when the physician doesn't believe in the technology. We have encountered cases where we have been imposed on the physicians, and these don't really work. But when you find these fans of technology, and I am every day amazed by the age of the physicians that we are finding in the fairs, in the salons that we attend, and they are gamers, and this type of profiles among physicians are perfect for implementing this. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. It was really interesting. We're going to wrap today's session, and we are very grateful for your presence here today and the comments that you're making in the social media. And we're talking about the good practice in the use of video games. The IAV launched the Good Gamer initiative that has as goal the promotion of responsible consumption. We are all concerned by this. The between 6 and 64-year-olds is the age of the usual gamers, and we tend to devote about 6.5 hours a week to gaming. So to talk about good practice, we have Jaime Gil Robles, Philip Gonzalez, who is an expert in digital disconnect and also the author of the book called Move to the Plane Mode, and also we have a professor from the University of Victoria, Juan Pablo Romero, and this roundtable is being moderated by Santiago Bustamante, who is an anchor in a broadcast radio channel in Radio 3. Hello everyone. We are very glad to be here, very happy to be able to have the opportunity of having a neuroscientist and to be able to talk about culture, because video games are culture and they also move culture forward, and the path of culture is being led by video games in many aspects, and they can be even interesting to the mathematicians, the scientists, and all sorts of disciplines that are developed around video games. And I think this is a very motivating power that video games have. And in my radio program, I highlight this aspect every Sunday. Well, we have Phil here, we have Juan Pablo Romero, he's the neurologist, who is going to share a very interesting project where he's using video games and trying to study what goes on in the brain with the rewarding system that video games have. And also, as a representative of AEVI, we have Jaime Gil, who is going to give us a perspective from the science viewpoint, from the industry viewpoint, and also from the social perspective, because video games need to be delivered in the right doses, so to speak. I think we can start with our neurologist, with Juan Pablo. He can tell us what his experience is and how he becomes interested in the video games and in using them in a scientific field. Well, thank you. Thank you for the organizers for having scientists here. And I am here as a representative of all scientists today, but there are so many people interested in this nowadays and in treating patients, among other things. I started being interested in video games because I work with Parkinson's disease, and this alters the dopamine, a substance that is very important for the reward and goal achievement mechanism. So the brain, as we are studying it, can be understood in two different levels, in a shallow level and a deep level. I'm going to tell you a bit about the reward mechanism so you can understand why I'm interested in video games. Our brains are designed for us to live in nature, and this is in the deep part of the brain, and this is very sensitive to external rewards, and this is what we call the limbic system, that is run by the cortex of our brain that develops as we grow older. Up until we are 25, this cortex is not fully developed. So up until then, we are very impulsive. We are dependent on our instinctive part or on our emotional part. So dopamine has a role to make us see a goal and try to achieve it. And the higher the levels of dopamine, the eager we will be to try to achieve this goal. There are different mechanisms that are activated when we use WhatsApp and other social media. Our dopamine rises when we look for a reward. For instance, if I'm playing a video game or I'm carrying out any task in the real world, and dopamine is a substance that allows me to look for the reward. You are all familiar with serotonin, which is important for the reward, but dopamine is the substance that drives me towards my goal. So with Parkinson patients, when we provide them with medicines, drugs that deal with the dopamine, we see a phenomenon that makes them too eager to get this reward. For instance, let's say a patient loves to make jam and derives pleasure from making them. So when we give them this type of specific drug, we could see a negative effect that would make him try to find this reward too much or too often. And dopamine levels can be risen with different activities. For instance, video games do this, but this does not always have a negative aspect. When we have a high level of dopamine, patients overcome their apathy, their lack of interest of doing things. So if we have the right levels of dopamine, we might be enabled to get hooked to any type of activity. This is why video games interest me, because when we use them with Parkinson and other neurological pathologies, I can determine to what extent the mechanisms in the video game are raising the dopamine levels too much, and this can entail a risk of having an addiction, leading to an addiction. And to what level also this dopamine can be positive and provide with cognitive benefits. There are many studies that deal with the positive effects, the multitasking abilities, and benefits even to improve the sight of many patients. For this, we need the video game to actually raise the dopamine levels. So, and then to control this level so that the patients get the benefits from the video games, and at the same time we do not overpass the right amount of dopamine that would be negative. There's a conference very famous by Daphne Bevalier, who had a study panel with her students and measured several things that went on in the brain. She claimed not to know anything about video games, but she ran this experiment that is very famous and is on the social media and on the internet, and she tested how the cognitive capacity of people was enhanced, and the people who played video games had better skills at multitasking and increased their skills as they played more, but obviously always keeping the dopamine levels at the right level, so to speak. But we're going to talk also with Jaime Gil, so he can tell us about the industry perspective. A few years back, I wanted to talk on behalf of the people with disabilities who were seen as outside this industry. All these games at AAA move a lot of money, but there's a great amount of people who cannot have games that are adapted to their particular disabilities, whether physical or mental. And it's important to speak on behalf of these people and how the industry is evolving toward the integration and also to the integration of medicine and video games to help children and young people who can find in video games a way out. For instance, when they cannot move through a video game, they can actually experience movement. Well, thank you very much for your introduction. I think that we are at a key point for the industry. Traditionally, the idea was just to make video games and sell them, and now we're moving towards an exercise with a great social responsibility, Good Gamers, a good platform where you will be able to find all sorts of recommendations coming from the industry who are working with professionals to teach, for instance, or to show parents what they can do in order to help their children to play safely with video games, and to explain everything related to the parental controls and the different age levels for games. So we want to provide tools so that gamers can enjoy and stay in the enjoyable area and do not go beyond to where it's not so safe. And also, we want to gather all the initiatives from the industry so that we can support further integration aside the experiences from great big companies. There are other initiatives for children with disabilities that enable them to play with other children, with their friends, or how we can train emergency teams in hospitals to work. For instance, we teach these people how to cure people, how to treat people, but here we can simulate, as we do with, for instance, with the army simulators for pilots. We try to do the same thing with real situations, and this type of experiences are included in Good Gamer because we want to give a broader vision and also to open a new space for science, for neurologists, for sociologists who can come closer to the industry and achieve a real integration. I think that we also need to think about relatively young industry that has come out of their gamers niche, so to speak, and they're finding the great repercussion of the video games, and they're actually determining the culture of the 21st century. This goes beyond the esports sessions and the hours of playing that a single or a multiplayer group can spend. But now I would like to leave the floor to Phil. I think that I was almost suffering seeing you there without saying anything. Phil comes from the opposite side. He comes from working from the dark side, generating digital content, and suddenly he realized that he was using his mobile at all times, and he wanted to disconnect himself from all this. Yes, I've been working for 20 years in the internet world, so you might say I'm around 32 or so. But in fact, I've been for 20 years working in the internet world, and what I'm interested about is the fact that what you have been talking about has a lot to do with what I have been doing for the past 20 years. I've worked for Orange. I've worked with a great TV producer, producing series such as Breaking Bad or Mad Men that are actually cult series that can even be addictive. And in the past 8 years, I've created an Instagram fan community. We have an Instagrammers gallery in Fundación Telefónica for several years already. So beyond all these things, the Instagram lover, I've been interested in the whys. Why we like an app, why we like a video game, and what Juan Pablo was saying is very interesting. Why are social media so addictive with all these concepts of likes? Even Ronaldo being the first one in Instagram with over 1 million followers, he's always concerned about the idea that somebody might catch up with him and overpass him in numbers of followers. So I'm interested in the processes by which these dopamine levels make us want to have more likes. But you see that nowadays there's being a change in the trend, and many people want to take the metrics out of all the social media. If you don't want to see the likes or the followers that you have, I can erase this from your social media. This is very strange. 8 years ago, I talked to Facebook and I asked them if they would ever remove the likes from their system, so that we share just because we want to share, not because we want any likes. And they said, that's interesting. And now they're introducing it and they're testing it in some countries where the likes have already disappeared. Why am I telling you this? Because this is a lot to do with the dopamine, with the addiction that we feel for something called entertainment. Sometimes entertainment can clearly be video games, or it can be something more passive. I'm just looking at pictures on Instagram and seeing the world go past my eyes, like our parents used to do with the TV. But I think that I'm especially interested in knowing how the video games actually make part of this global entertainment industry. And I was recently reading an article, I invite you to see my tweet feed, about the relationship of technology and happiness. I think it's very interesting to see how this is evolving nowadays, to see that youngsters are about 6 hours a day connected, and they use the internet, but also there's a lot of gaming there, and social media and the internet are making us unhappy. This has been proven by many studies. They do not say, I am using the social media for 6 hours and then I'm unhappy. But when you see, when you pair the studies, you see that there's a correlation between the situations. So what I would like to know is, how do you see this evolution? How will the age categories evolve in front of the use of social media and the games? And I hope that you, as experts, can give me an answer. And I would also like to say that video games have become the reference topic that we need to talk about. Before, we used to discuss the episode of a series when we got to school. Nowadays, if you go to school or high school and you don't play video games, you're a nobody. And this is what's making video games so important in our society. Nowadays, all young people need to know a little bit of video games, but also they are changing society. They're turning us into a more individualistic society where you can be in a waiting room without saying hello to anyone. You're just looking at your mobile phone. I will not talk about my book right now, maybe later, but I would like to ask you what your opinion is on this. Well, a first quick answer to your question is knowledge. To know what we're facing, know the age codes, and know all the category segments that we have in the PEGI coding. There are different websites where parents can see that their children have been playing this game, can be played by different children of different ages. They can actually check them by themselves and then share with other parents that this code is failing here, or that maybe this game was recommended for 7-year-olds but can be played by younger children, etc. So this is also the way this is evolving. I belong to the generation where our only entertainment was TV, and I remember very clearly adults saying, oh, you're all day long in front of the telly and you don't do anything else. And this reminds me very clearly to the debate that's going on right now. The same thing happened with comic books. But there's a big difference. Video games make the users interact, and this is something very different from the television, because television doesn't require too much effort from your side. But also, many of us who are not so young anymore are gamers. I have daughters who play video games, and I am a gamer myself, but we are talking a lot about why we play and how we play, and Good Gamer has been made by parents who play video games and parents who don't, in order also, or among other things, to avoid the quarrel between the generations. Because we have this tendency of leaving our children in front of the video games on their own. Sometimes you can find parents that tell you that their children are playing video games that are high above their age, and this is something that parents should be reflecting about. We do not want to make generalizations. There are thousands of video games for all tastes and ages, and I like to tell the example of a video game being used to support autistic children, or to support rescue teams that will have to help others in the emergency rooms. And this is also part of the video game industry. Or, for instance, it's fun to know that Wii Sport is one of the most sold video game in the United States, because people actually love playing sports in front of a screen. And it's very important for parents to participate in the games that their children play. For those of us who are older, I invite you to join in and play, because it's interesting. Also, those who are managing or ruling the country should also know about video games, so that we don't feel like we are freaks just because we like playing video games. Back in the day, Obama had just arrived in the White House, and I was told something that I have never forgotten. I was told that the revolution was not that a black person is in the White House. The revolution will come when a gamer is in the Black House. And maybe this has happened already, because you have to just see who is in the White House right now. But to be honest, we see that there are so many other fields, like labs, museums, that are using video games. It's just this gap that we need to overcome. We need to have rulers who really know what video games are and who are gamers themselves. Well, I need to tell you that there are many politicians who like playing video games, and the new generations are also gamers. In a presentation of a white book, I asked different politicians from different parties to tell me about the video games, and the answers were that Pedro Sánchez from the Socialist Party was playing an NBA game. Rajoy delegated his answer, and he said that his son used to play a FIFA game. Ciudadanos also played another football game, and Rejón played Commandos. I would like to say that one of the good initiatives in Good Gamers to raise awareness about the people who are not in the street, to realize that all the games are actually supervised, and the use of the data that we provide when we game could be, all the gathering of these data could be used to establish good practice manuals, so that we incorporate neurologists in the industry. So, for instance, the age classification is not really meaningful. The development of the brain could be completely different from one person to the other. So it might be interesting that video games developers develop a way to process all the data that they receive from the gamers, in order to alert when there is a behavior that is not, let's say, acceptable, because games are actually replacing many needs that we have, and they are rewarding us. We know that video games are promoting certain functions of the brain. If we turn this into a game that could suggest actions that are not really positive, we could use the data that we obtained from there in order to learn more about the attitudes that we can have when we are playing video games and in the real world.
Not.
Well, actually, of the goals we have set is opening ourselves to scientists like you to find a way to have games stay as what we call a game, just entertainment, playing, and then how can we help science to move forward. So, of course, this door is open to cooperate on many initiatives, and this is what Good Gamer is about. Doctor, one last question. Was the last video game you've been interested in, and personally and as a scientist also? Are the same game or different things? Well, I answer you telling you a real need I have. Sometimes in a patient, I need to know his ability to inhibit impulses. So I need a gamer to explain what test I'm going to use, and the gamer will tell me, well, this you have it in this game. So because there are different mechanisms and different screenplays in games, I don't have the knowledge about games to choose the right game, and instead of investing time to develop something that has already been invented, so we need this experience of people that are gamers. They have experienced many games, they have played with many games, and then there are some of us who need this experience to apply it. There should be more forums where we can express what needs we have with our patients, and gamers could tell us what is out there that we can use. So you don't play any games so far for leisure? Well, I don't. I currently play no games. The video games that I use with my patients is not Assassin's Creed or something sophisticated. What we do, for example, now is we capture the EKG waves of patients. For example, when the patient is moving a hand, and we try to reinforce these waves by observing the video game. When these waves go up, the video game does something. For example, is moving a car. So with these games, this is a problem because they are boring, so patients don't get engaged. So there's no good screenplay development for these games. So what we offer is a 3D experience with a 3D headset, and we have gotten with some applications some improvements in balance by playing on a video game 30 minutes a day during 3 days. So imagine what we could do if we could get this patient moderately engaged to this game. So this is a scenario where neuroscientists are asking to be involved in the design and development of video games. So Philip, well, El Rubius tweeted, I think the fourth tweeted with more interaction in history. That was before the tweet of the re-election of Barack Obama. So when we're discussing how to integrate that the content of video games would be more cultural, We are analyzing all the also neurological aspects, also education through parents. But what I think is still missing is the involvement of players, of the leading players at world level on YouTube. On the 21st channels of YouTube, the most powerful ones are video gamers. Same goes for Instagram. I have seen this because I was on Instagram from the beginning, and I saw when video gamers arrived how they became top accounts on Instagram. I think that when you are a child, you believe a part of what your parents tell you, but mostly what your idols tell you. So these people have become idols, and we have an opportunity to approach them and have them play this educational role for gamers. So these references for children should also be references for the good use of video games. What do you think? I think it's risky, it's dangerous when you mention engagement or addiction, if we use it without thinking what it means, because addiction has a very specific clinical meaning. Sometimes we say we are addicted to video games, and most times, even though we say so, we are not addicted, because we still have a control over what we do. We don't classify as for addicts, and this has gone also for video games. If someone says I'm addicted to series, there's no problem about this. If I tell you I've been binge watching The Sopranos, there's no problem about this. But if I tell you I've been binge playing Call of Duty, then you think I have a serious problem. Well, there's also many people that are really addicted. Well, of course, maybe if you say you're addicted to Walking Dead, we saw on Instagram, we had like 1 million tweets on Walking Dead, and we heard the phrase, there are many addicts, and of course it wasn't no problem about it. Yes, but if you apply it to video games, it does sound something wrong. Yeah, there's one thing we have in the health field is DSM-5, and it has a proposal which is a gaming disorder with some inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria which are based in the interaction with the activities of daily life. If someone chooses virtual interaction compared to real interaction, so you have to fulfill some of these criteria. And I think that the fact that some games are addictive, this phrase shows some ignorance. If you use this as a generalization, it's like if you say medicine is something bad. Well, I think there's lots of culture in video games to deliver. It's like here I have spoken about neuroscience, but also in video games there are many things that we don't realize, like for example social interaction of a game, or the level of reward. For example, what you have said about how it measures the likes that you get. Like, for example, in our video game, when we designed it, we needed to include a score, because patients, when they saw their score and someone else's score, they were more motivated, because if not, they got bored. So there's many things that have already been done by video games. Previously, they were done just to sell more, but now they can be applied to meet our needs. So I think like this phrase of addiction, it has to do with the world of gaming, and this should be discussed by psychiatrists, because they have this term of addictions to not to substances, and this includes gaming addiction. And for example, among adults that play more than 6 hours a day, they have a gaming addiction. Well, yeah, of course, you mean saying 6 hours a day, and just 1 out of 7 of them has an addiction. Well, I think it's confusing. Sometimes we cannot tell what's behavior and what's product. It's like if you say Prozac helps you to solve some disorders, but of course if you get addicted to Prozac, then you have a problem. Our goal as an industry is about helping to giving all this advice for gaming to be a positive experience, and this is what the good gamer is about, and this is what we are investing. And actually the situation in Spain is very good. We have over 16 million players, and there's no reason for social alarm, social concern. We are far away from the figures around Europe, and what we have to do, we have to work on knowing how we could help science in order to make this industry more integrating. Well, for example, from the point of view of science, there are studies on first-person shooting games that may improve, for example, visual acuteness. And I think this could be, there should be like a label to certify which are the good aspects that there are to a game. I think this should be available for people to know when they use this game how they should use it, what recommendations. I think that actually common sense should be enough. We always say that common sense is the best tool. Another tool that we also like is available to parents, which is parental control. I think this is the best tool to generate a discussion between parents and children. If I apply to your device a use of 30-35 minutes a day and the console then stops working, then there will be a conversation between parents and children. So you have the opportunity to say, okay, this is enough playing, now you have to do something else, you have a home course or homework. Okay, then we have time for, I think we have time for questions. We have a question there. Hello. Great presentation. I work in gamification, which has become a very popular term. And one thing I've realized, you have mentioned PEGI, and I think I've always been a gamer, and I've also experienced this transition from being a freaky to being popular. We always hear about the logical and limiting functions of PEGI, but there is not a tool to classify the positive aspects of a game. Like if a game fosters cooperation, teamwork, or whatever, there's no label for that. When I'm with an audience that they think, they believe, they know anything about games, they abuse the word playing, and they associate it with children. And actually we know that the brain that's playing is a brain that's learning. And I don't know how this is going to be integrated in the Good Gamer initiative, but I always try to explain that players are structuralized according to the mechanics. There are different game approaches and aesthetics that lead to different dynamics of gamers, and I don't know to what extent we can see as something wrong that a gamer does some things in a game, like shooting someone in the head. If you shoot someone in the head in a video game, that doesn't mean you are a psychopath. That means you just wanted to try it on the game. So this is a question because you have to make an effort of dissemination, and I know there's a lack of knowledge, and I don't know how the Good Gamer initiative will do it. Well, I like to give some context. This is a very good question. PEGI is a European organization. We're all part of it, and I will take your proposal. I think it's a very good idea that if we are alerting on some bad aspects, we should emphasize the good aspects. And there are some websites where parents can score some good aspects like love for nature, friendship, and other values. Any more questions? Yes, we have a last one there. I have a question. In my family, my cousins, they play whatever they want, and my uncles, they don't know what they're playing. So I propose that in addition to websites in the schools, in the educational centers, they could educate parents and give them some culture so that they can have an idea of what their children are facing in video gaming. Well, I have no children, but I work in training and I work in digital connection, and there's no training for this. Schools, we have blackboards. Schools, there are no screens. So from children are learning in schools that are just like the schools that we went to. So parents, they don't know anything about this. So taking parents to the school and saying you have to learn this, and this in order to educate your children, probably wouldn't like it. I think this should actually be the first training to become a parent. Well, we are dealing here with multiple intelligence, and we are also rewarding memory capabilities. And I think we have a lot to do in this sense, because the educational system is too old school. Well, this personal case that you just told us is very usual in Spanish families. We have set ourselves the goals to work with the administration, because you have to cooperate with regional administrations to see how can we educate these parents that just don't care what their children are playing and how long they are playing, to let them know about the tools that are available, parental control, PEGI, the Good Gamer, as platforms where they can speak. This is about speaking. Anyway, behind this video gaming, there are some more serious problems in the relationship between parents and children. Now, the last question by Inigo. Please, you have to be very fast. We're running out of time. Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment. Just want to say that in Navarre, we have this e-gamer project that's doing this already. This is designed for schools, for educating parents, just exactly what you're talking about. So, and I think that there is a niche for startups and for someone that wants to create something, and these guys, they saw an opportunity, but a small opportunity, but I think this is also a great opportunity, because educating families in the schools is one of the things that we can do. Well, I'd like to thank the presenters and also the audience for being here and for participating. Tomorrow We'll start at 10:30 with the second session of this Congress. We will speak about video gaming and its connection with filmmaking, mental health and tourism. So I'll see you here tomorrow. Thanks.